Japanese tea bowl. So for those of you who weren't in class today, a little backup here, or a little information for you. So one thing to be aware of as you start out is that you have your worksheet, and hopefully you've already circled some of the designs that you're interested in, at least 3 of them. Your sketchbook assignment is to draw those out and then to choose one that you're actually going to make. So when you start out with your clay, you want to have an idea of where you're headed. Otherwise, you're going to struggle. And there's a lot of variation in the tea bowl shapes. So as our technique continues, it will change depending on the shape that you're headed towards. So keep that in mind. So have your sketch kind of figured out. Then you've got your clay. Hopefully you have softened it up a little bit, kind of when it was in the bag. Drop it on the floor a couple times or whack it against a hard surface there. And then you've got a piece of string in your packet. So you're going to lay that string roughly to be halfway across the clay, okay? And then pull both ends of that clay towards you, or however it works best. This is our little slicing tool, and cut that clay in half, okay? So half of the clay is going to go back in your Ziploc bag. Grab my bag here. Get my tools out. And then half of that clay is going to go in the bag for your next project. And you just focus on half of it today. So get all the air out of there that you can, and close that up, and set that aside. You don't need your string anymore either, okay? So ultimately what we're aiming for is making a tea bowl shape. This one's kind of a nice example because the size of it and the general shape of it is a more traditional kind of shape. And it has a nice little foot ring that we'll work on for the second half of the project tomorrow. Today it's really focusing on making the tea bowl itself. This design has just been pressed in with really simple tools, things that you might have at home, or just like the little popsicle stick that got sent home in your package. You can press and create designs in the surface of your clay once it's all set up. Or other found objects at home that you can press things in. I let everyone know you guys got 2 popsicle sticks, 2 bamboo skewers. Those are there for backup in case one gets damaged, you have a second one. But with the popsicle sticks, you can also cut the ends to be in different shapes if you want to on one of them. Because when you go to impress a design in, maybe you want to make a little diamond pattern or a little arrow pattern or something like that. It would be nice to have a corner that way. But you can do the same thing with other tools and things that you have around the house that you can make designs with, as well as kind of carving and scraping things away on the surface, that's another option. So making a fairly simple form today to start with, and then we'll show you the direction to go to finish shaping it. And then tomorrow we will focus on the foot ring and completing the piece, okay? So first off, with your ball of clay, or piece of clay, you want to turn it into a ball of clay. Adjust this camera a little bit out. There we go. So just pressing it into a ball. Because I didn't know what surfaces everybody would have at home, and it probably isn't consistent for all students, your clay is already wedged up for you, that technique I showed yesterday. So today is really just pressing it into as close to a round as possible. Does not need to be perfect, but the closer to the round, the easier it will be as you start to form. Okay, and this technique, along with all techniques in clay, really has to do with pressure. Pinchpot method is really nothing more than pinching, except the more part is being very aware of whether you're pinching with your thumb to your fingers or with your fingers to your thumb, and how much pressure that you're creating when you do that, and how much water and how soft the clay is in the meantime. So when you do push your thumb in to the ball of clay, and as you are pinching, you really want your thumb to be what is sitting still, and the pinching method is happening with your fingertips. You don't really want to have your fingertips on the outside of the clay and have your thumb pushing out to the wall or out to your fingertips. If you do that, your bowl is going to get really big and wide and kind of floppy. And instead, you want to pull your fingers towards your thumb, so instead you're getting more of a cup or a U shape. Okay, so that's the goal. Also, you notice when I pinch, I'm gonna pinch using my middle finger and my ring finger primarily. So that's what I'm pushing against my clay and ultimately against my thumb. I don't use my index finger very much, or I resist doing that as much as I can because we tend to overpress with that finger. So it's kind of better to use your middle finger, ring finger. Your pinky might get in there too, that doesn't matter so much, okay? So I'm gonna push my thumb in, roughly in the center of the ball of clay there, up to about my knuckle. And then I'm gonna start rotating the clay, and while I'm rotating it, I'm pressing lightly or gently, but pressing with my middle finger and index finger. Not index finger, ring finger. But I'm gonna rotate around as I go, and then I'm gonna rotate kind of in a swirl pattern down all the way to the bottom as well. So I'm just working around and around and around on the clay. And this takes time. Making a pinch pot is not something that's really fast. You want even pressure. You want to ultimately end up with walls that are pretty consistent thickness all the way. And the only way that you can do that really is to take your time and to press gently. So I work in a pattern through the wall of my piece, sort of working my way around till I get to the base and then swirling back out. The place where you notice I'm not gonna put pressure is on the rim. I'm really not worried about the rim. This is gonna naturally kind of thin as I progress. And if I pinch on the rim, I'll get too thin too fast there generally. So as you start with this process, you're really focusing on the walls and the base. And you can see it leaves little dimples of finger marks because I'm using enough pressure that I'm moving my clay here, okay? But not so much pressure that I'm leaving these big wonking marks. I want to overlap each place that I put pressure. I'm overlapping a little bit with my fingers so that I continue to have fairly even pressure. Okay, so you're going to do this for a little while. The inside should be really smooth all the way. And you might notice there's a little bit of kind of an interior rim here. Again, because I'm really emphasizing that I'm not pinching on this edge. I'm inside, my thumb's inside, and I'm pressing around with it. Okay? And you can use either hand to do it. And switch. Now my piece is getting large enough that it's kind of hard for my thumb to reach all the way down to the bottom of the piece. So I'm going to hold the piece in my hand and use all three of my fingers and start applying pressure kind of in a swooshing, pushing motion. Just continuing to push that clay. Now I'm pushing it into the palm of my other hand. So it's important to do this within your hands, not to set it on a table and try to push. You'll get a flat bottom and you'll get really uneven pressure because I want to feel where I'm pushing with my fingers. And this is just continuing to thin the walls out as evenly as possible as I go. Not worried about really shape yet. This is much more just about getting those walls fairly even pressure. Having my walls even thickness all the way around. I'm still very much in progress. Where did my, oh, there's my ruler. Just so you can kind of get an idea of where I am in the process. So I'm just a little less than a ½ inch thick right now. And I want to get down to being just a little less than a ¼ inch thick. So that's the end game, is to get pretty thin. Like the rim of this piece, it's got an uneven rim on this particular one, but it's pinched pretty thin, and that's what I want to go for. This one is another option. This is probably the thickest you want your rim to be, which is just, again, under a ¼ inch. but that has that flat edge, so you can see it a little bit easier than you can on that piece. So as I'm going here, I'm at the point where I want to start thinking about my shape that I'm ending up at. If I want a tall cylinder that's going to get fairly long and narrow, or if I want to start opening it up a little bit and getting a low, rounder kind of shape like these guys. This guy in the middle is a little challenging for this particular project, so I would aim for something that has a little more lift up the sides, okay? But that's where my technique is going to change a little. If I'm going for these more rounded shapes, I'm pretty much going to keep going the same way with this pressure of my fingers pinching in towards my thumb, and the bowl will just gradually begin to spread out as it thins. If I want something really wide, then I'm going to start applying a little bit more pressure from my thumb to the outside to start opening the bowl up. If I want something that's really tall and cylinder-like, then when I'm pinching, instead of pinching straight at my thumb, I'm going to actually be kind of pulling up towards my palm as I'm working. So that changes the technique a little bit if I want to get tall and narrow. Again, not trying to move the clay too fast, so be patient here, but sort of stretching it up as I'm pinching and overlapping my finger marks there. Okay, so that's if you're going for something that's going to be long. I'm starting to do this motion. So I'm pinching, but I'm also sort of pulling in and scrunching my fingers together. So you could take time every few minutes to kind of just roll your hands through and feel if you have thick and thin spots, but otherwise just keep making. I'm going to go for something more in the middle ground, so something about there. So a little bit of thumb pressure, a little bit of finger pressure. Opening the shape up a little bit, starting to get closer to the rim. And right now I have a really round base. If I want it to kind of square out a little bit, I'm going to use my fingers on the inside, kind of pull across, and start to form the base a little bit more while also thinning it out. So you want to do this before your clay gets super thin. Okay, some troubleshooting. If you notice the edge of your piece is starting to get really crackly. Mine, I'm not too worried about. As much as it doesn't look very pretty at this point, I know that if I just use my finger or thumb and put a little pressure, I can smooth and remove most of those cracks. Because the clay has enough water in it, I don't need to add any more water, I just need to compress or push together that edge. Clay really likes to be compressed. It does not like to be stretched. So sometimes it's just that edge is kind of stretching out because you're pressing and the clay gets stretched on the edge. Other times that rim is getting cracked because it truly is dry. So if you go across it and it's just not kind of healing itself very well or smoothing out, you can dip your fingers, just the tips of your fingers, in a little bit of water, and then just give that area a little water massage. You do not want to add a lot of water here because you don't want to have a sloppy mess. So it's just adding enough water so that you can heal up or add a little water back into that clay. But I would not like start just putting water all over everything. You want to work in an area and get it smoothed out and then move on. Again, your clay should be in pretty good shape unless you've been spending a lot of time on it. If you've been spending a lot of time and if your hands are fairly warm, your hands are going to pull some of the water out of the clay. And if you're taking a lot of time making your piece, which isn't a bad thing, but also realizing that the air in the room is on the surface of this clay, so it can begin to dry it out quite a bit because of that. So again, I'm going to go on the inside of my piece and sort of start stretching the base a little bit. Even though it's pinching, I am running my fingers across the bottom here and starting to get that shape, and then coming back and compressing and working those walls. And at that point, when you start getting large enough, if you want to have your thumb on the outside, thumb on the inside, just again being very aware if you're stretching the clay outwards or upwards. Fairly thin here. You can see that edge. Okay, it's getting pretty close. It's definitely down to inside of 1/4 of an inch. Okay, you may not have a ruler nearby, so just, you know, kind of moving it to that point where it's thin enough that it's still, the wall is really supporting itself, pretty sturdy, not collapsing in on itself, but also not so heavy that it feels like the walls are just sort of chunky. You wanna get that wall thickness down pretty well. And I'm gonna have a fairly upright cup here. I opened it up a little bit. Again, stretching out in the base because I don't want the bottom of the bowl to be really heavy and the walls fairly thin. Want it to be pretty even. That's where I am, thick and thin. Okay, hopefully thin all the way through. Got some little craggly bits on the outside, but the walls themselves are all sturdy and strong. So when I wrap this up for today, I may put a little bit of water on some spots that feel a little dry, but I'm not going to add a lot of water. Again, I don't want this to be a slippery, sloppy mess. I just want to make sure I add a little hydration in areas that were a little drier than others. And then what you want to do for today is you're going to store this, and you're going to store it upside down, sitting on its rim, not round side down. So I take my bag with my other piece of clay in it, and I'm going to squish that piece of clay into a circle, just a rough circle. And then turn my bowl over. I'm gonna put my ball of clay right inside, and this clay is softer than this clay, so they're gonna kind of balance each other out as they're stored together. And I'm gonna put it right back in my Ziploc bag, being pretty careful. Turn it upside down. Close this guy up, try to squeeze as much air out of the bag without actually squeezing my bowl. So I want my bowl to stay the shape it was. I don't want it to get really squished up. So I have a ball of clay inside, and it's going to get stored upside down on the rim so that I just don't distort the shape any more than I have to. And this is going to set overnight, and then tomorrow we will come back in and finish up the form and get the foot ring attached, and then you have some time to get some design on the surface.